So I have the honor and privilege to introduce our next two speakers. I'm Nate Vogel, Director of Sales Readiness, and I shared this story yesterday, but worthy of sharing every time. I've been asked lately to do lots of introductions because last year's conference I was doing a part for the partners, and I had a very excited person come up to me and say, "I am so excited to hear you speak." And I'm like, "Thank you." And he said, "I've been really reading a lot about you." And I said, "Well, that's great. Thank you." He's like, "I follow you on LinkedIn, and you're really moving the needle with data." I said, "Thank you." I was like, "Oh, I wish my wife was this excited to just even spend time with me." He was very enthusiastic. And then he started saying some stuff that maybe I thought some of the data was incorrect. He said, "You know, you really have really helped me in my career and all the things that you've been," and I knew something was wrong. Then I knew something was incredibly wrong. He says, "My coworkers won't believe that I've met you." Then I knew something was wrong. And then I said, "Well, thank you." And he walked away, and I mumbled from his voice, "I can't believe I just met Nate Silver." And Nate Silver was one of our speakers last year at the conference. And I was like, "Oh, should I go grab him and tell him that I'm Nate Vogel?" And I just let him go. So the power of a proper introduction, and that's why I've been asked to introduce our wonderful individuals. And I have to share a few accolades about them because I think it's worthy of sharing. As you've probably read a little bit about their bio, Capital One has really about change with Tableau. And I just have a couple things to say, and I'll get off the stage. They have an absolutely incredible story. April 2013, they had 50 desktop licenses. August 2014, they have over 1,000 desktop licenses at Capital One. And they're really about change today. Both of them have great stories to tell you about Tableau, how they're using it, how they're implementing it, how they're helping it with the executives. And I just wanted to make sure that we give them an awesome, proper introduction. Let's welcome them to the stage.
Thank you very much, Nate. Appreciate the welcome. Thanks to all of you guys for coming out this morning. We actually got a little bit of a tough time slot. We're going up against the Tableau Iron Viz competition. So I don't know, how many folks have been to see the Tableau Iron Viz before? Oh, a handful. So for folks who haven't been, it's actually really cool. They take 3 Tableau experts, they give them a bunch of data, and then in front of a live audience and with judges, they have to, in 20 or 30 minutes, build out a visualization and be able to tell a story about it. And then they get judged on it. So in the future, not this year since it's the same time as our talk, but in the future I would definitely recommend going in to check out the Tableau Iron Viz. So as Nate mentioned, I'm Brett Wolfel. This is Ben Porter, and we've come today to talk to you about building a culture of visual analytics at Capital One. So before we get started, though, I just got to say that this is my 4th time to Seattle, the weather this week has been just phenomenal. The first time I came out was actually in 1993. Was here for 3 days. I could not see Mount Rainier the entire time. Actually went to Mount Rainier, and I still could not see it. So weather's just been phenomenal. To the people at Tableau, I don't know how you did it. We really love your software, but your device that controls the weather, I think, could be far more valuable. You should definitely look into marketing that. So just to give you guys a little bit of a background on what Ben and I do at Capital One and our group within the company. So we are part of the Enterprise Digital Group. So we're a horizontal group within Capital One, and we work with a variety of the different lines of businesses. So we work with our card business, we work with our bank business, our financial services businesses, and we're on the business side, although we do work very closely with the folks in IT. Our specific team is called Digital IBS. So I'll pause while people chuckle at IBS because it is kind of funny. But in our case, thank you very much. In our case, IBS actually stands for Information-Based Strategy. And it's really part of the core of Capital One and what's part of the DNA of the company as it's developed. So we started off as a credit card company, and really some of our founders' ideas were that using information and data to drive decisions and potentially better decisions than competitors are making is really a way to be successful at business. So we've kind of taken that idea 20 years later and have put kind of a digital slant on it. So we're really focused on a few things across the company. I'd say our high-level goal is really elevating analytics and helping our analysts become more successful across the company. So a few of the ways that we do that are, one is through enabling different tools. For example, Tableau is certainly one that we've enabled and work with stakeholders to roll out, which is what the focus of our talk is going to be today. For some folks who might be interested, other tools we've worked with and helped kind of roll out at Capital One are Site Catalyst for digital analytics, T-Leaf, which is a session replay tool, multivariate testing, just to give you an example of a few. And so just to kind of get an idea of what this crowd is composed of in terms of what folks do and where you stand with Tableau, by show of hands, how many people have Tableau Server rolled out? Okay, so a pretty good amount. And then how many folks are on the IT side of the house? Okay, and how about the business side of the house? All right, that's what I expect this talk, so that makes sense. All right, one more question, then I'll stop asking you guys questions for a while. So how many folks would say that the business side and the IT side collaborate together as closely as you think they should? Not as many hands, okay. So just wanted to get a feel for the audience. So one of the reasons I wanted to understand that is, and I think it was kind of what I expected. Wow, things are going well over there. You guys feel free to do that at any point during this presentation as well. Anytime. Yes! Thank you. Really just wanted to get an idea for, both IT versus business, kind of the various backgrounds people are bringing in here, as well as, kind of where people stand with their Tableau deployments, either desktop or server. And it seems like there's people are at a variety of different places, which, I'd expect with a, big crowd like this at the conference. So I think that really the goal that Ben and I have for this talk today is just to kind of go over the road or the journey we've been on over the past couple of years with Tableau and Tableau Server, and really give you some of the learnings and experiences that we've gone through with the hope that, regardless of kind of what your role is at your company or where you guys are with Tableau, that you'll be able to kind of take away one or two nuggets that you can take back to your companies, and hopefully it'll help you guys out. Yes, I like this guy. So if that ends up being successful and it works for you, then this presentation was entirely conceived by me. If not, then Ben designed all of it. Just a quick look at the agenda. So I wanted to just talk a brief overview of Capital One. I think folks are probably familiar with it, but would spend a slide or two on that. And then why Tableau? So from a couple perspectives. So the first perspective is what was the need or the gap that we felt we needed to fill? And then specifically within that need or within that gap, why did we end up selecting Tableau? So our approach really specifically kind of within the context of our culture at Capital One. And I think that's really important because everybody's got different cultures where they work. And I think one of the things that we found is that the approach that we found most successful, and I think you guys will too, is one that's tailored to the culture that you work in. And then talk a little bit about funding and setup. So funding and setup is specifically geared towards Tableau Server. And it sounds like a lot of you guys have Tableau Server up and running at your places of employment. I think a lot of the people that at least Ben and I have spoken to have a very kind of IT-centric deployment of Tableau Server, where IT is kind of the hub for everything. We've federated a little more out through the businesses, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the approach we've taken there. Then roles and responsibilities. We've got tons of people from a variety of different groups who are involved with Tableau and Tableau Server, Capital One, so I wanted to give a little overview of that. Governance. Governance is actually really key within our industry because, being a large financial services company, we're heavily regulated, so talk a bit about the governance piece. Training and engagement, I think that's one of the things we've found has led to the most success and adoption of Tableau and some other tools across our company. So Ben's done a tremendous job kind of putting together that agenda, so he's going to talk a bit about that. And then just kind of the road ahead from where we stand currently. So, you know us for Samuel L. Jackson, right? Who doesn't like that guy? And what's in your wallet, our tagline. So just curious, who here has a Capital One credit card? Yes, we thank you for your business. So it's actually interesting. When I started at Capital One, I was a little bit disappointed because I kind of envisioned it like ESPN, in the commercials where like Peyton Manning's walking around the hallways and Calvin Johnson turns into a drink machine. So unfortunately, I haven't seen any of the Capital One sponsors at headquarters yet. But I'm kind of hoping that at some point in the future, I'll be going towards the cafeteria and I'll run into Samuel L. Jackson. And he'll pull out his wallet, which, of course, will have to be the same one from Pulp Fiction, right? And he'll pull out his Quicksilver card and offer to buy me lunch. So it hasn't happened yet, but if you guys see me at the Tableau conference next year, please feel free to come up and ask me if that's occurred. Kind of a quick overview of Capital One. I think most folks are familiar with it. So we are, big bank, big credit card company. Also have some other businesses such as auto financing and home loans. What I really want people to take away from this slide, though, is not kind of the stats about Capital One, but really more of the bottom two bullets. So we're a very consensus-driven organization, and I think part of that stems from being heavily regulated and really having the need to make sure that people across the company agree upon a direction before we move forward. And then, as I mentioned before, we're extremely heavily focused on analytics. And the reason that I call out those two things is kind of going back to the culture. One of the things we've learned is that the culture of your company is extremely important to how you would roll out Tableau Server, or I think anything somewhat similar. And so as we kind of go through the presentation, I think we'll kind of go back to touch on some of those points and how that's been relevant to our experience. Yep. So Ben is a former Army guy, so whenever possible, he likes to pull out either quotes from generals or military analogies. So we wanted to put one in the deck here, which I think is actually quite relevant to the topic today. So it's from General Eric Shinseki. If you dislike change, you're going to dislike irrelevance even more. So I think that people have probably been in that same position where trying to explain or get people to accept change is difficult. If you happen to get into a conversation with the vice president, I don't know that if he immediately doesn't accept your desires to roll out Tableau within his organization, that you would come back with this particular quote. That would not be my recommendation. But I do think that this is kind of a good setup for kind of some of the different types of things we're going to be discussing and how change can be brought about and some of the ways we've tried to influence that throughout Capital One. So for this slide, I've got to ask, is anyone in the audience from Train? Oh, yes, Train. Were you at the San Diego conference in 2012? Were you? Wow. Well, we definitely stole this slide from you, so thank you very much. So we actually saw, Train gave a presentation in 2012 in San Diego that was somewhat similar to this, kind of some of their experiences around Tableau and rolling out Tableau Server and culture of analytics. And so we ended up talking to a number of the folks. Were you part of the team that did the presentation? Oh, man, you were excellent. You seeing our talk? Well, you have to give us some feedback later. Yeah. But anyway, so we talked to these guys afterwards. Super nice guys, knew a ton about Tableau and had a lot of experience rolling it out. So we really liked the model and the framework that you guys had built out to kind of explain this. So I hope you don't mind that we borrowed the slide. Please, anyone else, feel free to borrow it from us since we borrowed it from Train. But if you kind of take a look here, the paradigm is really the different stages of analytics. So if you read from the bottom left upwards in the white boxes, you're looking at, so what happened in your business? Why did it happen? What's happening now? And what's going to happen in the future? So you kind of go from static reporting up to more of predictive analytics. So at Capital One, a couple of years ago when we were starting to kick this off, we were very strong in the bottom left, the blue. We've got SAP, we've got business objects, as well as a lot of analysts running SQL, putting data into Excel, and then putting it into PowerPoint. So we knew what was going on with the key metrics around our business. And then in the top right, the blue box, the SaaS, we've got tons of analysts, lots of people who are really strong at predictive analytics. So we really had that piece kind of well fleshed out in terms of this model as well. The part we were really missing is the self-service analytic tool. And so what we ended up doing is we got a number of different groups who are kind of starting to test out things like Tableau and ClickView and Spotfire and Little Pockets and got them all together. And we decided to put together an RFP. So part of it was organic. We had enough demand to start it up that we put together an RFP, started off with about 12 or 13 vendors. ended up narrowing it down to one, which obviously was Tableau since we're at the Tableau conference, and selected that and decided that would be the enterprise self-service analytics tool that we would roll out with. So that's a little bit of context and kind of how we got started. And now I'm going to turn it over to Ben to kind of continue with the rest of our journey.
Thanks, Brett. So as Brett mentioned, we got to the end of our RFP process, and we had selected Tableau, and we needed to do two things immediately. We needed to start socializing Tableau. What's the value proposition? And we needed to build a center of excellence and a user community. So we fondly refer to this time period as the Johnny Appleseed year. We went high and we went low, kind of all over Capital One, saying, hey, this is the value proposition of Tableau. Let us tell you how you can be successful using this. So in terms of socialization, we did everything under the sun, peer-to-peer learnings, grassroots approach. But what we found was the most effective was getting our leadership to connect us with other analytics leaders within Capital One. So our vice president, a man named Tom Poole, was incredibly supportive of our agenda. And he connected us with a very influential and a very senior vice president in our card partnerships analytics group. She runs a team of probably somewhere around 150 analysts, looking at a variety of different performance metrics. So before the meeting, she had sent over a book of her business. She showed us the type of analysis that her team did. And one thing that stuck out was kind of interesting. There was a geospatial analysis done of performance for a particular partner, and it took the analyst 10 hours to put this together using SAS, Excel, and PowerPoint. All right. And so before the meeting, we got the data set, came into the meeting. First 10 minutes, we talked, hey, I'm Ben, this is Brett, this is what we want to do. And in the next 8 minutes, we recreated that visualization from scratch. Right. So we walked her through, this is connecting to a data set. Oh, hey, thank you. I thought it was a good idea, too. So we walked her through, this is how you connect to a data set. This is how you build measures. This is how you build a custom calculation. This is putting it all together on a worksheet. This is putting it on a dashboard. And this is adding an interactive filter. So you can now actually cycle through more than just one partner, right? You could look at all 7 or 8 in this industry. So, essentially what we did is we gave her a real easy, no-brainer decision. Do I want my analyst taking 10 hours to do this, or do I want my analyst taking 8 minutes to do this, right? And at that point, that opened up the door for us all across the board. I think we'll do questions at the end, but absolutely, please feel free to ask one then. So this set us up for success. So, Melissa said, John, Bob, Sue, go talk to Ben and Brett. They're doing something fairly interesting and new with analytics here at Capital One. So the second thing that we needed to do was build a user community. So as we're going around socializing, we did some pretty basic things. We put a shingle out on our company's intranet site. So we started up a Tableau user community. We put together some rudimentary materials. Where should you look for training? What are some ideas? Here's some office hours you can attend to start to learn more about the tool. And so from this kind of set us up on a trajectory for growth. We're using Tableau within our company. So to put some of these numbers in context, the first arrow is April 2013. That's last year. That's when we started socializing Tableau within Capital One. And that time we had about 50 desktop users, about 50 associates with Tableau Reader, and no one on server. At the tail end, that is the end of last month, that's August 2014, we have about a little over 1,000 desktop users, 7,000 associates on Tableau Reader, and 1,000 associates on a brand new Tableau server we just deployed a few weeks earlier. So obviously we're going to try and push a few more folks onto server. So one of the key takeaways here about this is that as we were setting this up and moving forward, it's agile, it's adaptive, and it's constantly having your finger out in the wind and asking people what do they need, what do they want. So obviously the way you support 50 desktop users is vastly different than the way you support 1,000 desktop users. And so it was constantly going out there and evolving what we were doing and changing and changing and changing to meet the need. So what's interesting about this point is see kind of where the middle arrows are. That's about when we had enough center of gravity around Tableau, started having a discussion about Tableau Server. So, and this is funny. So the way we actually went around, getting interest in Tableau Server was slightly different than our Johnny Appleseed approach. Of, Johnny Appleseed is how we did desktop. That's essentially how we did Tableau Server, right? It was an exercise at cat wrangling and cat herding at its finest. So, as Brett mentioned, culturally here at Capital One, we're pretty kinetic as an organization. We don't like to stay still. We're, have a large sort of pent-up demand for analytics. So, as we went through and set up these different groups on Tableau Desktop, they started to evolve and they just went all over the place. This again was really kind of the same technique. It was our leadership setting up meetings with other analytic leaders in the company saying, hey, this is the value proposition of Tableau Server, right? You've got automation, you've got security, right? You've got better controls on your governance, and by the way, you could actually look at some of this stuff on your iPad, right? Who doesn't want to do this? This was also kind of fun in the fact that this is the first time that Brett and I really got to see how the inner workings of a large organization really get down to business. So, with the finance team, what are the open and closing dates for transferring money in between business units to meet fiscal year-end obligation recording dates? Fun stuff like that. Working with our IT department to find out, who do we have to talk to open up ports and firewalls and, all that good type of stuff that, since Brett and I are not necessarily IT guys. So, I'd say, again, the key takeaway here is, success breeds success. The folks that were interested in Tableau Desktop were very interested in Tableau Server. As we were setting this up, this was a pay-for-play model. So IT said, we're happy to help you out, but you have to fund it yourselves as lines of business. So, once we kind of got all the cats in the room and explained that, we found a coalition of the willing to go ahead with an investment in Tableau Server. What I want to show you next is kind of interesting. So, at Capital One, as Brett mentioned, we are in digital, and our leadership is pushing us to be digital first, digital first, digital first, digital first. So, in everything we do, we try to be as digital as possible. So we decided, we had some Google Glass prototypes lying around, and we said, hey, let's go ahead and let's wear these let's wear a Google Glass while we're going to these meetings to socialize Tableau Server, and we'll record this, and then we'll look at the output, and then we'll coach ourselves, and we'll be much better at socializing this value proposition. So, I'd like to share with you a quick video.
Well, so needless to say that first meeting didn't go that well, but I guess we must have gotten better over time because ultimately some of the folks we met with in our lines of business did decide to commit some funding to Tableau Server. I got to say, Ben, though, you look much better. You lost a ton of weight.
Yeah.
That is impressive.
Yeah, a little bit of hair, too.
A little bit of hair. Right, so at this point, we've kind of got this commitment from some of the lines of business. They're interested in Tableau Server. They've committed funds. So we've got to figure out a plan to get something built that they can use in fairly short order. So what we did is we put together a plan, a 3-step plan. And are there any South Park fans out in the audience? A few? All right. Just to tease it, there's actually another 3-step plan from South Park that we're going to allude to a little bit later. So just as a teaser for anyone out there. So anyways, in this case, our plan was plan, build, and operate. So step 1 was planning. So really there's a couple key pieces, I think, to this. So the first piece was based on these first 2 bullets. So we wanted to really understand what the objectives were and then pull together the key stakeholders to assess the feasibility of these objectives and then prioritize them. So just to give a couple of examples, one example was around data sets we wanted to connect to. So we've got a number of data sets, Excel, Teradata is really big for analytics, Hadoop, SAS, a number of other data sets. So we had to figure out initially to launch which ones of these we wanted to be hooked up to and which ones we thought we wanted to prioritize for later. So in our case, most of our use cases were analytical in nature, and they were really based around connections that people had to Teradata, which is our largest analytical platform. So we decided to go with Teradata and Excel to roll out. And then we took all the other data sets, even though they're important, and we said, hey, let's kind of prioritize these for later. One other example was around access. So who would actually have access to our server environment? So obviously the folks who have funded it internally within Capital One, we need to provide access to. But there are also a number of groups. Ben had mentioned our card partnerships group earlier, who have reporting and analytics that they also share with some of our external stakeholders. So we took a look at that and said, all right, the need for right now is let's get access to the people who need it internally at Capital One, and then subsequently we can worry about excuse me, some other of the folks outside of the company. So I think really the key takeaway is figure out what's important to you. It doesn't have to be, in our experience, Server doesn't have to be perfect when you launch it. Kind of figure out what's important, get that out there so that people can start using it, and then prioritize everything else, and you can kind of build it out over time. Kind of the second point on this is the last two bullet points. So we really had to figure out what type of model we wanted to embrace at Capital One. So did we really want to have an IT kind of centric rollout where everything goes through an IT group and potentially a center of excellence group? Or did we want to have more of a decentralized model where you've still got IT and kind of that center of excellence in the middle of things, but you're really distributing a lot more control to the lines of business? And so ultimately, that's what we decided to do. So the lines of business, we asked them to provide site administrators who would really look over their own sites. And then we also asked them to kind of really be responsible for the day-to-day operations of their own sites based on some kind of centralized guidelines that we had put together. And so one of the reasons, or a couple of the reasons we decided to do this at Capital One was due to our existing structure, right? So as I mentioned before, we've got a lot of really smart analysts. They know their data extremely well. They're really handling a lot of the reporting and analytics currently, like writing really complex SQL queries, getting into the data. So having them do that wasn't a dramatic change from the way things were currently working. And then the other piece is, as I talked about a little bit earlier, data governance is extremely important to us. So we've already got really robust kind of controls in place around who accesses data and things like that. So that kind of piece of the infrastructure was already built out. So for us, kind of that decentralized model to put Tableau Server on top of that existing infrastructure just made a lot of sense. And I don't know, I'm sure that other folks have kind of different cultures and different organizational makeup. So I would say that when you're thinking about how you want to roll it out, what we learned is kind of certainly take into consideration the context and the structure of your organization. And that's what we did in our case. So we had a plan in place at this point. We had a roadmap. So now we had to actually get Tableau Server built out. So the first thing we did was we put together an Agile team. So show of hands, how many folks here use Agile methodology? Okay. So decent number. So put together a team. We'll talk a little bit more about Agile in a second for folks who may not be quite as familiar with it. But once we sign the contract and we're going to get Tableau Server in the door, one of the key things we did right off the bat, and this may seem like a no-brainer, it probably is, but just wanted to make sure we emphasize this because we found it to be extremely important, is that we got consultants in immediately, both on the technical side to work with on the architecture piece of how to set things up, as well as to get some ideas and best practices around training. And in fact, we're still working with Tableau Professional Services around the way that the architecture of our server is set up, constantly kind of working to tweak and refine the way it's set up to optimize performance for our environment. So then in terms of Agile, we put together a team from people across a number of lines of business. Ben and I were part of it. IT was a key part of it. And we had 2-week sprints. So essentially what we did is we took kind of the most important pieces of what was on our roadmap and took that down and said, this is what we want to work on over the next couple of weeks, and had planning sessions. And then we'd actually get together and work for 30 minutes to get together a day, talk to each other, and go through things at a very tactical level once we kind of had that 2-week focus around things like, what did we get done yesterday? Were there any impediments that we faced? What types of issues did we run into? What do we need to do the next day? So at a very tactical level to really try to build out a plan in different stages so we could get this server eventually built out. And then at the end of the 2-week sessions, we would have retrospectives. So we'd talk about things like what went well in the sprint, what didn't go well, things like that. How would we like to improve this process going forward? And then the last step was we had the roadmap. We had a plan for actually getting server built out. So we needed to operate this thing, right? People have to be able to use it. It's got to be able to run. So the way we kind of approached the operations is we started off from the perspective of getting a process SME for site operations, which is AKA this guy. So really, we also work closely with our data stewardship teams and our IT teams. So the types of things we're trying to figure out is we need to put together a plan for access and provisioning, for end user training, for a number of different things. So kind of those middle three bullets, we really wanted to figure out as part of these sprints how we would onboard new groups, how we would train new groups, how the site administrators would be responsible for best practices within their groups. And once we did that, we got our site admins together and had a bunch of meetings, like 2-hour meetings. They probably hate me for all the meetings I set up prior to launch. But we thought it was really important, right? Because with the number of different people involved, we wanted to make sure that everybody knew what their kind of roles and responsibilities were going into the rollout. And so that's what we did. And kind of with these 3 steps, we went from some point in February, we started this whole process. And then by mid-June, we were actually able to roll out. And as Ben mentioned, we're now up to about 1,000 or so folks on server. So I'll turn it back over to Ben now to talk a little bit about some of the roles and responsibilities we've got at Capital One.
Thanks, Brett. So as Brett mentioned, essentially we think we have the right balance between centralization and decentralization in the way we've really deployed server. What's nice about the central aspect of it is that essentially we have the same cast of characters for each site, so we can develop a common training plan, common resources to help them out, all of those things that are good. At the same time, too, each site has its can essentially use server to the types of analysis they want to put on server. That's up to them. The first step in the process is our data guardians, and our data guardians are critically important to our success with Tableau Server. If you're in a heavily regulated industry where essentially you need to make sure that only certain people can access certain parts of the data, you may have a similar function in your industry. If you do not, then this may not be as important for you. But these data guardians have been in existence here at Capital One for a number of years now, and essentially they map each person to the types of data they should have access to. So this was pretty easy for us. They already had a very robust system in place, so it was more of them teaching us about how they do business, and us saying, okay, well, this is probably the best way to then set that up within Tableau Server. Our next cast of characters, our next group is the publishers. So essentially these are our analysts out in the different business units that are sitting there, producing good stuff, and they go ahead and want to share it on Tableau Server. Now the next critical piece in this, and we'll get a little bit more into this, is our site admins. Our site admins are, as Brett alluded to earlier, come from each line of business, and they have a critical job in aspects of quality control that we'll jump into a bit. And the last group is the interactors, which are generally pretty easy to care for. We just really give them instructions on how to either navigate Tableau Reader or navigate Tableau Server, that type of thing. So in essence, this is really a distillation of our governance model. What we have is our publishers are our analysts out in the lines of business. They're doing work, and they want to share that work with others. So what they do is they publish into what we call uncertified space. So at this point, only the publishers can see what's in there, and the site admin. The site admin then can go ahead and acts as our quality control stopgap. So he has a list of things that they're going to go through. So they're going to check, number one importance is the data classification right. Some data is a little more difficult to and requires a little more access control to get to. So is that on the correct site? So that's number one, and that's critical. The second thing that's important is making sure that the workbook is designed efficiently, right? So with desktop, you can get by with pretty clunky, ugly workbooks, right? You're only really chewing up your own local resources. Obviously, once you're in server, a bad workbook on server can pull down the performance of the rest of server. So workbook design, workbook efficiency is key. So that's the second thing that they look for. And then we're trying to get some visual best practices out there. So it's the site admin's job to make sure that the workbook looks correctly, and the visualizations are structured appropriately for the type of content they're trying to convey. So it's pretty obvious here that if we start to fail the site admins, everything else is going to fail. The minute that we're not responsive to them, the minute that they don't have absolutely everything they need at their fingertips to do their job well, this could all go downhill. So this is really the role that we try to hand pick, hand select, put the best of the best of the best in this role. And then obviously once they say it's good, they push it out into the certified space, and then the rest of Capital One can take a look at it. So we also keep each other honest. So we've developed a suite of dashboards to take a look at Tableau Server performance. So we're looking at number of users we have onboarded, data capacity, all those things. We had some folks from Tableau Professional Services come in and show us how to get to the Postgres SQL database that's behind it, and that's how we're looking at a lot of those things. We went a little bit further than the normal monitoring dashboards that come, as you could see as either a system admin or a site admin. So, we get together fairly frequently to discuss these things. So, example, data storage. We want to see that, hey, our retail bank site is at 50% of your storage. Do you think you're going to be, kind of closing that pretty soon? And so we can just start talking about that, start getting into basic health and hygiene metrics. Do you have any visualizations that haven't been looked at in 90 days, 100 days, that type of thing? And maybe you should start thinking about pulling those off the server. So, as we get into this point, now we have this vision in place to deploy server, and then we want to get to adoption. Now, what we found, and what the boys from South Park illustrate quite wonderfully, is that there's kind of this middle step involved. So originally, this was South Park's critique of the dot-com business model in the early 2000s, but it has surprising applicability to enterprise software deployments. Right. So this is actually kind of shockingly similar to a lot of ways that we have maybe received technology from our own companies, right? And it's almost like a drive-by. Hey, you've got business objects, and then you see the taillights floating off into the night. So we actually played that clip for our chief operating officer, and he thought it was hysterical, and he kind of got it right away. So the way that we look at adoption is really balancing three specific areas. So training is pretty straightforward, right? That's the knowledge, skills, abilities you want each user to have. And then there's something that's sort of related, but it's a little bit different. It's a user engagement strategy. So these are the things that are really kind of the sizzle around Tableau, right? These might be events at community all hands. It may be specific data visualization competitions you have. We have something called the Visual Analytics Forum, where every month we get leaders from different lines of business to share how they're using Tableau, right? So, a monthly business review in our bank is probably similar to a monthly business review in our, home loans business, right? So, those executives can see how other executives are consuming Tableau, and it's pretty wonderful. And then overall, too, both of these items are kept in context of the platform. New functionality that's coming down the road. We saw the demo for 9 on Tuesday morning. That looks pretty cool, right? And that's just kind of more work that we have to do to talk about new features and get those socialized within our user community. So kind of make that decision. Is that something we want to put in training, or maybe that's a new function or feature we call out during an office hours call or something along those lines. We'll talk a little bit more about kind of the difference between those. So our training strategy is really straightforward, right? Essentially we look at our analyst community. We look at their knowledge, skills, and abilities. We have archetypes where we hire in for either business analysts or data analysts. So we know their skill set that they're going to have kind of coming in the door. The next thing we look at is functionality enabled by Tableau. So based on what they can do, what the functionality is in Tableau, and then the final piece is the business. What do they want to do this to work on? So we kind of put all of these three things together, and I work with a lot of the other site administrators. It's sort of a hub and spoke model, and we talk about what should be done in-house, 100%. What really needs to kind of have that Capital One stamp on it, and then what could we potentially borrow or buy from other folks to get this done. So that leads us essentially with our build and our buy strategy around Tableau. And what's not on here is the borrow strategy. So has everyone here spent time on Tableau's website? Everyone here has at least seen a training video on Tableau's website? Okay, knowledge-based articles, the forums, Tableau Public. These are all incredibly, incredibly well put together free resources that you can point people to, right? So Borrowing from Tableau is absolutely one of the things that we've done to make this pretty successful. So, at the end of the day, too, it was also looking internally, but looking externally as well. The customer conference, user groups, meetups, those types of things. Getting out there, talking to other companies, and seeing how are they supporting Tableau, and that's been a key to our success as well. And also, as I mentioned earlier, we constantly are surveying the user group, mostly informally, but we'll do maybe 2 formal surveys a year to understand what their needs are. How can we do better? And also chatting with Tableau professional services as well to get their take on the universe. So this is essentially the model that we've settled on for training, and this is more specific for our desktop and our publisher community. So essentially we want them to do the basics online. You think of the 5 first introductory Tableau videos. It's maybe an hour's worth of content. It's amazing. It walks you through step by step by step by step what you need to do to be able to operate the tool. There's 2 white papers that we recommend they read as well, along visual best practices. And then we give them an online assessment exam. All right, so it's 10 questions. It's pretty simple. I've had analysts say, I downloaded desktop in the morning, watched the videos, took the test after lunch, and I got 100%. Right? It's not very challenging. But once they have that, they've basically satisfied all the prerequisites for intermediate instructor-led training. So this is the place where we really want to spend time and energy coaching people on visualization best practices. Why should you use this type of visualization versus another visualization? What's a good way of summarizing a lot of data? How do you add filtering actions in? So this is the thing that we rely heavily on. Stephen Few, Ed Tufte, Ben Schneiderman. Reading those folks, taking that thing and applying it to how we do business at Capital One. And then for advanced level training, this is something that we'll either engage Tableau professional services on, or we'll use peer-to-peer learning events. So peer-to-peer learning events is kind of where we get into the bit of engagement activities. So these are events that are maybe not so much geared towards core knowledge, skills, and abilities. Sometimes they are. But they're also used to drive sort of excitement and adoption of the tool. So we do a spring fling and a fall ball. Never really graduated from college, I guess. And it's a great way for analysts who have learned something to be able to showcase their work to other analysts. It's a great way to build a lot of other different skills that are tangential to Tableau as well. As I mentioned earlier, other types of engagement activities. We hosted our version of the Iron Viz this June. We had about 80 people in a room about this size watching people work Tableau in real time and solving problems. And kind of funny comments is one of our senior vice presidents said, "I would never watch someone do work in Excel, but for some reason it's actually interesting to watch people work in Tableau." So those types of events are just kind of fantastic as well to help kind of support the user community. So essentially then this is our breakout of training by different user groups. Our consumers are really easy. We support those all with just online resources. A couple web pages on how you navigate Tableau Server, a couple web pages on how you navigate Tableau Reader. We're good to go. Publisher, as I mentioned, we have that kind of starting off with the online materials, some intermediate level training around heavily focused on design, heavily focused on data, and then if they do want to get to be a publisher, there's a data governance training that our data governance team developed for us. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the site admins generally kind of have all that, and then we spend a lot of one-on-one time with them. So as Brett mentioned before we launched Server initially, we had probably 3 or 4 different 2-hour working sessions with them, walking through everything that's expected of them, showing them how you actually manipulate Tableau Server. And then also, I think a critical component of this is that we have an active relationship with Tableau Professional Services. Not only do we understand what they do and what they can bring to the table, but they understand what we're trying to do and what we're bringing to the table. So they understand the classes that we offer internally, and we can understand what they offer. And we try to make it as modular as possible. So, for instance, we might not have an intermediate design class available for 3 weeks, 4 weeks out. These are scheduled through our learning and development team. If a business unit wants to get up on speed tomorrow and has the money available, it makes perfect sense, for them to start next week with Tableau Professional Services for like a 3-day deep dive, let's jump into it type of class. But we just, we work with each other constantly and know, we keep each other up to date on what we're doing respectively. So the last thing I want to get to and talk about is we use our digital platforms for managing all of this. Much easier to have a few websites on our company page that we funnel everyone to take a look at so they can start to answer questions and ask questions among the own user community. Sometimes I'm not, like, is this really working? Is this really working? And then I'll have on my out of office, reply when I'm, gone for a week, for questions about Tableau, go to our user community site. And it's always those weeks that I get back into the office that there's 10 new people that have joined and asked and answered questions. So I might just stop responding to email altogether and put the auto reply on go to Tableau website or user community website. But this is one of the things that it actually is probably my favorite performance metric, is to see how many new users we have on this, how many people have posted content to this site. You don't want to try and manage any of this stuff through PowerPoint decks on a shared folder that are saved to desktops and hey, we've got something new out here. So this is something that just has saved us an immense amount of time. Has been kind of great for our success. So with that, Brett, talk about our next steps.
I will. Thank you, Ben. So I'll try to go through these relatively quickly. I want to make sure we leave some time for Q&A. But so some of the things we've got coming up on the horizon are fine-tuning operations and maintenance. So as I mentioned before, we're kind of constantly working internally, getting feedback from our users to see how the system's working, both from a technical perspective and any feedback from end users with issues or suggestions or things like that. And then we're also working very closely with Tableau Professional Services to kind of constantly try to monitor the platform and see if there's any ways we can improve the underlying architecture or things like that to improve performance. Determine demand for additional cores. So, we rolled out 24 cores in June. As Ben mentioned earlier, we're up to about 1,000 users. And now as people outside of those groups who aren't part of that initial rollout have started to see success stories and how people are using Tableau and Tableau Server, they've gotten really interested too. So we're looking to do a Q4 expansion, probably another 8 or 16 cores, and get a bunch of additional groups provisioned and start getting them ramped up and up to speed. Add additional functionality. So some of the things that I had mentioned earlier, they were part of the roadmap that we hadn't gotten to. Like a big one that we've got coming up is mobile. Which for anyone who was at the Keynote Tuesday saw all the cool functionality there. So we're looking to get that rolled out the door fairly shortly. Different data sets, connection to Cloudera, things like that, or Hadoop. And the last one on here, I think this is really a critical one, which is really making sure that we have a way through a lot of the avenues that Ben mentioned to really share visualizations and visualization best practices across groups. Because what we've seen previously is that reporting and analytics tends to be fairly siloed. And so, someone might create something that could be very beneficial for someone in a different group, but they just never get to exchange that or see that. So I think a good example with Server, since we've rolled it out, is I've actually seen 4 different customer satisfaction dashboards that have been built, right? Which if you build one good one, everyone else can probably leverage 80% of that for what they're looking for. So we really want to make sure through a lot of those channels and different meetups and events that we're able to get the word out to other people so that we can kind of use the power of Tableau Server for sharing to make sure that we're getting the most out of it across the entire enterprise. And then just one more thing I'll mention, one thing that I would highly recommend to anyone who's interested whatever level with desktop server or anything like that, find people, network, just really start talking to other people who are in similar situations to you. That's what we've done. We worked with Train. We actually met with the guys from Comcast yesterday. We're talking to some people who have server at John Deere later this afternoon. So talk to them, ask them what are the issues they're facing, what are the successes they've had, and really just build your own community. That's how we've really found, I think, over the past several months, has been led to the most success. And I think you'll find that a lot of people are in very similar situations to you, too. So with that, this was in the deck. I guess we're supposed to put our pictures in here, but Ben liked this handsome guy so much that he just left him in here.
The hair and cheekbones.
So after this presentation, please remember both of us as handsome guy here. from now on forever. So yeah, with that, I'll open it up for questions. Yeah, right here. Good question. So the question was when we had the chart that kind of showed the reader growth doing the hockey stick curve, how do people access visualizations through Reader? So short answer is one of two ways. Either people, I guess the most common way I would say is that people post it on kind of an internal repository, like a shared drive within Capital One. And then if they have a report or something they used to typically send out, they'll send out an email with a link back to that location, so that rather than sending out a PowerPoint deck, people can actually just go into the Tableau visualization through Reader, where they're able to interact with whatever the person's created. Yeah, right in the middle there. So the question is, how are we determining who goes to Reader and who goes to Server? So really, it's so far it's been driven by the businesses. So a lot of people, as they're getting ramped up, have taken on Reader because it's free and it's a good way to really test out the capabilities of Tableau. And then some of the other groups who are a little further along with it and more experienced with it and really see the benefits of kind of being able to distribute things through web and then eventually for us mobile and have those sharing capabilities and the governance, are really the ones who started to move over and embrace Server. So it's driven by the businesses, but I think ultimately we want to move more away from Reader and push everyone kind of towards Server. Yeah, right up here. How is it funded? So the question is, how is it funded? So it is funded through each of the lines of business. So the way we've got it set up is the businesses will fund their own desktop licenses, and we'll have periodic expansions of Tableau Server, and we'll go out and talk to the kind of the cat herding slide. We'll talk to the various stakeholders we know who are interested, figure out who wants to contribute money at what level, and then those are the people who get built out as part of the additional capacity on a shared server. Yep.
Certain things we leave up to the individual lines of business. So within digital, we have, I don't necessarily enforce a certain color palette, but I want standards. If on this visualization, your vice president likes to see, blue is good and orange is bad, I just want to make sure blue and orange are the consistent blue and bad colors throughout. The one thing you get probably was a learning curve is that folks like to do bar charts for time series and that type of thing. And if you've ever seen what that looks like after 120 days of say monitoring, and it might be stacked and it just gets horrifically ugly. So those will be like lessons I'll post out on our internal Tableau website of hey, you should think of using something else than a bar chart for time series, because we have a very ingrained PowerPoint centric way of looking at things, right? And most people in a PowerPoint just look at the last 14 days, last 12 months, whatever the case may be. They generally don't look at things that have a long tail associated with it. So that's been a bit of a learning curve. We really leave it to the different groups. Our card group may have a slightly different take on things than our bank group and our digital group, and we're okay with that. Yes, sir? It's not a full-time gig. It is a side desk for them.
Just to repeat the question so everyone can hear it.
Yeah. So the question was, is a site admin a full-time job? A site admin is not a full-time job. Essentially, it's a few hours per week, and generally most admins will spend maybe 20 to 35 minutes a day doing all the different things that they need to do. So, and that brings up a very good point, is that it's critical that Brett and I reach out to their leaders and say, thank you, your site admin is doing an incredible job and is doing something that's very valuable for the company. So recognizing our site admins, making sure that their leaders understand that their access to Tableau is all because of this one person is important as well. Yeah. Sir, in the back? Yes?
Yeah, so it is. So, I mean, we started off when we rolled out in June. We started off with 8.17. And so, well, I guess to back up, so we're trying to make sure that we keep our desktop version in line with our server version, right? Because otherwise you have some inconsistencies and some problems with versioning and incompatibility. But so we started off with 8.17. We're in the process right now of testing 8.2, which we're going to roll out shortly. And then, probably the next big upgrade we'll have is when 9 comes out sometime early next year.
Yeah. We try to get a cadence of maybe 2 ones a year. This one was a little funny with Tableau's release cycle this year. 8.0, 8.1, 8.2 all came kind of stacked up close to each other.
Sure.
So the question was, how do we get analysts, the actual analysts themselves, getting excited about Tableau and get them using it? So the primary tool that we were really putting Tableau against was Excel, right? As we view it, Tableau is really sort of the natural competitor to Excel and PowerPoint. That was an easy sell with our analysts, right? So essentially, if you're showing, and they would put together, and when I say Excel, they're putting together, Excel workbooks that are 25, 45 megabytes, right? With 22 different tabs, running complex pivot tables across the board, doing all this, and then copying that data into PowerPoint. Most of the analysts that we saw, there's one group in particular, and he said, you can take this one monitoring report that you do now, it takes you 80 hours of effort, that can now be done in about 4.5 hours, right? That's an easy sell for our analysts, right? Who wants, no one wants to be sitting there slaving away for almost 2 weeks to get this report out the door, and you're not really sure if anyone's looking at it anyway. So that ability for them to get their job done just so much faster, so much easier, was an easy selling point for the analysts. The only point where we really kind of got stuck was in the middle. So the analysts, the folks at the ground doing the work, saw it and fell in love right away. Most of them did, some didn't, but they came around eventually. At the top, most executives we showed it to said, "Oh my God, I love it. This is great. Let's start doing this." We got a little friction sometimes in the middle, and then that was pretty much just solved with time. After 2 or 3 months, and maybe the vice president asks again, "Hey, I'd like to see this in Tableau," right? It's going to come out that way. But the analyst value proposition was for the most part a pretty easy sell.
Yeah, we'll do one more question. I think we're about out of time, and then we'll stick around afterwards for anybody who's got other questions too.
Do you have any PowerPoint integration? For example, if you're doing institution sales, typically they try to do pitch books. So do you have any PowerPoint integration where the numbers get changed automatically when you try to refresh it within the PowerPoint or something like that?
So the question was, do we have any PowerPoint integration? Are you talking about specifically with Tableau?
For example, is this particular PowerPoint had some graphs and some attributes related to that? And if I have to refresh it within the PowerPoint itself,
No, so we're not really doing it so much within the PowerPoint refreshing. So what we have seen some people do is if they have like a monthly business report that they put out, they'll go through their regular slides and then they'll have a link back to Tableau Server. And then for that piece of the discussion, they can actually get into more of a deep dive into the metrics and slicing and dicing through them in Server. So I think we're just out of time now. We'll stick around for more questions. So thank you guys all very much for coming out. Hopefully you got something out of it.